Alright everybody, this one might be a little bit of a lengthy video, I'm just warning you. Before I get into it though, just let me know in the comment section below if you would be interested in me setting up like a AMETHYST, maybe some coaching sessions where I can maybe go over this kind of information a little bit more in depth with you personally, tailor it to your needs. I am considering setting one up. I've been approached a couple of times, but I'll do my best to kind of showcase for you maybe as a preview of what you can expect, because in this video we're going to be breaking down the Amethyst Steel Tempo deck that I've put together. I posted a couple of matches on this on my YouTube channel you can check out, and of course there's going to be a number of different ways that you could build Amethyst Steel that will be effective for this set, for the set 7 metagame in Arcasia's Island, and we're mainly looking to combat Sapphire, right? Sapphire Steel, Sapphire Ruby. So with all that being said, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive without hopefully making this like an hour plus long video to talk about what are the pros and cons and interactions that you have to be aware of if you want to play Amethyst Steel. One of the pros right off the bat is you don't have to invest $1,000 or close to it in order to build the deck. It is very cheap, whether you go with a budget version, which is even cheaper than this, or a mid-range version like this, or a little bit more of an expensive version. But honestly, I don't even think the deck gets more expensive than this, honestly, which is a huge pro. And this deck, I want to say it doesn't really have any like blowout weaknesses necessarily, because it can contest rogue decks in the meta. It can still keep up with Sapphire. I mean, nothing is really keeping up with Sapphire, but it's your best alternative at least at the start of the meta to keep up with Sapphire. And again, we'll explain why. But the Amethyst Steel deck, you know, if you opt to build a more mid-range version like mine, which is crazy to say because it only caps out at 4, or a faster variation that focuses on the docks, right, where you empty your hand out, you play dock, you draw 2, you aim to basically race the Sapphire decks. I think any of those variations are viable, but in this video we're going to cover this version, which is the tempo-oriented version, or at least what I call the tempo-oriented version. Now, the Amethyst cards, which, you know, for the past 6 sets before Arcasia's Island, we all know they've been S tier, right? They've been the top of the metagame. They've always come out, whether it be, you know, at the start, middle, or end of that metagame, they've always come back to say like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still some of the best cards in the game, right? We're talking about things like Chernobog Followers, Diablo, Magic Broom, Madam Mim Snake, Madam Mim Fox, Merlin Crab, goats, and rabbits, right? Friends on the other side, etc. Well, we might finally be at a breaking point in that mold, and I'll explain why. And it is because of one card, really. Well, maybe 2, but definitely 1. As we look at the way that this deck is constructed, okay, you have 12 1-drops, and this is basically your standard Amethyst 1-drop package. You got the Chernobog Followers, you got Diablo, you got Magic Broom. What do these all have in common? They all replace themselves, or they're all supposed to replace themselves, right? You play these out, you gain your 1 lore or whatever, and then you banish them, or you trigger the effect to banish them and don't get rule sharked, or they get banished by a challenge or an opponent's card, and then you draw a card in its place. Great effect. Fantastic effect. Maintains good card advantage, right? Plays on tempo. It's a 1-drop. It's all inkable. Like, cards are fantastic. The issue you have with this now, or that you had in the past even, is like when you face a deck like Amber Steel Song, if your 1-drop, especially if you go second, if you're on the draw, if your 1-drop just gets Cindy Stormed, right, or Cindy Strength, to deal 2 damage to your card, you no longer have that 1-drop, and you may not be able to replace it, right? So obviously, if you play Broom on 1 and they storm it, you don't have the Broom on board to banish when you play another character to trigger the draw. Same with Chernobog. You don't have the Chernobog to quest, banish, draw a card. It's a little bit more impactful when you look at the curve of your deck as an Amethyst player, whether it's Amethyst Ruby, Amethyst Steel, etc. Because your Madam Mim Snake on 2 now becomes a dead card if you lose your 1-drop, right? And this was an interaction that was limited to Amber Steel Song, right? The Cindy Storm interaction. But if my 1-drop gets outed, my turn 2 Snake that I may have wanted to play, I can't play that now, right? Because I don't have the card to bounce back. We now have an even better interaction in Sapphire, and Sapphire Steel in particular, and that is the new Bell, which is the new card that's going to be a problem. This Bell, if it's played for free, right, turn 1, the opponent plays an item, they banish it, they play the Bell for free, It effectively costs 1 plus an item in order to play the spell, and why in the Sapphire Steel version it's such a powerful interaction is because the card that they play, the item that they pay the 1 for, replaces itself likely in the Fortisphere or the Popsicle. But now you have a 3-cost inkable 3/3 body on board that quests for 1. But more importantly, in the Sapphire Steel deck, this is a card that now will sing Storm or Strength, similar to what Amber Steel Song did on 1. This is even more effective at doing that. So if they go first and they go Bell on 1, and you're like, if I don't have the Diablo to, if they want to banish my Diablo, sure, I'll redraw. But if I have to play a Chernobog or a Broom, I don't want to play into the Bell Storm, Bell Strength, right? Because if they have Bell on turn 2, if they go Oswald or Tipo, they have 2 characters on board, which means the Strength will deal up to 2 damage, right? Which will blow out any of your 1-drops, because Magic Broom is your biggest 1-drop at 1/2. Could you solve this by playing the 1/3 cards, like, Olaf and things like that? Maybe, but is it really worth playing those? Probably not. So you have to take that into consideration, because this 1-drop package, while it is very good, you have to know how to play into the Sapphire decks. Diablo is still relatively safe to establish when you're on the draw, right? So when you're mulliganing, for example, you probably want to mulligan for Diablo if you know you're up against Sapphire Steel, because if they go Bell on 1 and then you're like, I don't want to play Chernobog or Broom to play into a blowout Storm, but I will play a Diablo. Versus when you're on the play and you're going first, you may say, yeah, I can play Broom or Chernobog, because if my opponent goes turn 1 Bell, like next turn I can proc these for their abilities to draw, or at least I'll have the 1-drop on board to trigger Snake. So that being said, there's another interesting interaction when we look at the 2-cost curve. We have Honey Marin, which is one of the new cards that allows you to gain a lore if your opponent has an exerted character. This card you generally do not want to play on tempo, so I would on curve. So I would say you could reduce this card to 2, not 3 copies in my deck, because you generally don't want to play this on turn 2. You want to play this a little bit later on. We are getting value to maybe get inch closer to closing out the game. But this card is pretty decent, and I think it's worth playing. But again, if you do have to play it on curve, it's likely better when you go second, because if your opponent is the first one to establish a 1-drop or a Bell, you can play this on turn 2 and gain the lore, which is effectively what you want to do, right? And this card can be bounced back and reused, etc., just like Goats, just like White Roses, etc. Where you have to be careful again is against the Sapphire decks, because they don't play 1-drop characters. They play 1-drop items, and then both the Sapphire Ruby, Sapphire Steel decks play Bell, so they still will establish a turn 1 character in the Bell potentially. And if they have the ability to quest with Bell, if they're not singing, or whatever, even if they sing, right, because they're going to exert the character, this card will be active to proc the ability. So yeah, interactions in this game are getting a little bit complex, right? The metagame matters, how you're playing into certain lines matter. The Snake is a little bit of a liability now for what I just mentioned, right? Not completely dead, still has value later in the game to bounce back your cards as well. But it's not nearly as strong as it used to be, because you now have 2 decks, even though Amber Steel has kind of fallen off, but Sapphire is we expect Sapphire to be everywhere, right? Sapphire Steel will be very popular. You now have that interaction to deal with. And it can be tough to try to overcome that. So we got 3 copies of Snake, and again, you could go 2 Honey Marin, 4 copies of Snake, but then you run into, again, being exposed to that problem. The best thing you can play is a Mr. Smee. And even this card, I've called this card many, many times the best 2-drop in the game. If they still are like, well, sing Storm or sing Strength with the Bell, put 2 damage on the Smee, now you're like, do I want to quest with it and lose my card? But it's at least a character that will stick on to, right? You can bounce it back with the Fox, etc. a little bit later. So Mr. Smee, still a great card to play, and probably your best 2-drop in all scenarios, play or draw, no matter what the board state is. But yeah, Snake is a little bit more of a utility card now, I would say, to like bounce back certain cards for use again. It's no longer as powerful as it has been in the previous 6 metas, where you establish the Snake on turn 2 and you just have this powerhouse 3/3 body on 2 that bounced you back a card, which is actually a good thing because now you can use that card as a resource, whereas you can't. Well, I mean, you can still do that now, but it's less powerful. What I will say is there is this new Raja, which is very interesting. I think it's too much of a risk to play, but think about this interaction. You play a 1-drop when you're on the draw, right? If you want better cards for going second. If you're so fearful of the Bell Storm, Bell Strength interaction, you go 1-drop. I still establish my character, even though I see you have a Bell on turn 1 because you went first as my opponent. And then if you Storm, Strength, whatever, my 1-drop, and you're like, okay, good, I've shut you off of your snake play. Now I put you on, you have to have Smee in order to develop a turn 2. What other turn 2 card are you playing? You could say Raja, right? This card is a 2-cost inkable 3/3 body that will survive a Storm Rage, but then it has the Vanish ability, so it doesn't survive the Storm Rage because if it's targeted by Storm anyways, it gets banished. But the key takeaway here is that this card doesn't require the character on board to be bounced back. So if you're looking for a turn 2 character to play out that isn't contingent upon what Snake is contingent upon, you could opt to play Raja instead because your opponent would have used their song, hopefully they don't have a second one, to interact with your 1-drop, leaving your 2-drop open out to develop the Raja, which is still a 2-cost 3/3 body. The issue remains, right? This is such a multi-layered, complicated issue. The issue remains that the opponent still has a 3/3 body that they played on 1 for free, or for banishing an item. So even though Bell comes down and sings the song and removes your threat, you still have to deal with the Bell itself, right? And for these Amethyst decks, it's like Snake now is not as valuable as a Bell. A Bell has outvalued the Snake, which is crazy, right? Because we know how good Snake has been over the past 6 metas. And even with your Raja coming down, if they have a second song, they can keep their Bell and just sing that song and take out your Raja anyways, right? Because the song doesn't even need to do as much damage to the Raja as much as its willpower. As long as it targets the Raja, it gets banished because of the Vanish ability. And then even if the Raja survives, or your 3/3 Snake survives, the Bell will just challenge into it, or you will challenge into the Bell. So they get so much mileage and value off of this Bell. It's absolutely crazy. But that's how important your early game interactions are with Amethyst Steel now, in my opinion, and some of the things you have to consider. So again, a very tight-knit 1-2 curve. If you are able to survive that opening interaction, you're in a pretty good spot. But that's how impactful Bell is to the metagame now for these Amethyst decks, which have traditionally dominated and been at the top of the metagame for the first 6 sets. For those of you that are complaining about Sapphire, I know Sapphire Ruby has been also at the top of the game for a while, but at least Sapphire Steel is getting some time in the sun now, which I'm not necessarily upset about. All right, so that's a lot to take in for 1 and 2. Next up, we move on to 3, and again, I mean, we're seeing power creep, right? Undoubtedly, a 3-cost 4/4 body in the Cobra. This is our new card from Set 7 Arcasia's Island that we're putting into our Amethyst Steel decks. It's I don't want to say it's a staple, but it's pretty good. It's overstated for its cost. It comes into play, you discard a card, you gain 2 lore. That's a very, very powerful ability. Similar to Goat, right? Comes into play, leaves play, gain a lore, whatever. This card gaining you 2 lore on the spot, that's really strong, right? I mean, you can be in a position where, you can quest up to 18 and you're like, oh, my opponent's going to win the game next turn. But if you have that Cobra, you're able to close the game out on the spot, right? It's even better than Goat in some instances, right? Because, you play it costs 1 less than Goat. It still has 4 strength. And you gain the 2 lore right away, assuming you have the discard, right? So with Goat, if you were in that scenario that I just described, you quest up to 18, you play Goat, you're at 19, and you're like, past turn, your opponent's like, okay, quest with Tamatoa, play my Lucky Dime for free, dime, another big Tamatoa, win the game. And you're like, yeah, if only I had a way to gain 2 lore, or bounce the Goat back and gain that extra lore, I would have won. Well, Giant Cobra can maybe fill that gap for you now. Of course, the drawback is its Vanish. So again, if your opponent targets it with a Steel Song or anything, it will get banished right away. But at least you got the value of gaining the 2 lore instantly. Yes, you lose the body, you lose quest for 1, but it's probably not the end of the world. when we look at, again, the significance of the new bell, it's crazy to say, because I've said this for a long time, the best card in Amethyst is Madame M. Fox, and that is slowly being challenged now. It is still a phenomenal card, but again, I play a bell for one, right? Banish my item that I usually, pay one for a popsicle photosphere, banish it, play bell for free. Am I gonna pay 3 and bounce one of my characters back to put a fox on board to get traded out by a bell? That's really bad tempo loss. Quantum, I thought this video was supposed to be how Amethyst Steel was going to be an answer to the Sapphire decks. Like, what's going on? Like, you're just talking about how Bell just decimates everything. Yeah, because it's the interactions you have to pay attention to. Because while I'm going over all of this, you got to remember, they're not going to have 4 bells that they're going to play out instantly. So you have to pick and choose where you want to see your bell trade out. Do you see the bell trade out into the 2-drop so that you can maintain 3-drop and whatnot pressure? Do we even need to build a deck this way? To cover Rogue, yes, but for Sapphire, I don't think there's really better options still, because Crabs, Foxes, Giant Cobras still can do enough into the metagame, because the Fox still trades out the Scrooge, and with the Crab, it turns pretty much any of your characters into cards that are able to take out the Tamatoa, the new one, the 6 cost. The issue then becomes that Tamatoa has to have itself turned sideways, which means if it quested, they've played an item for free, and hopefully it's not a lucky dime. Yes, you are going to be struggling into Sapphire. Every single deck is going to be struggling into Sapphire. But these are some of the trades you have to pick and choose, because you don't have the luxury of saying, I can just instantly take out one of your big characters when you play them. This is the reality that we're dealing with. To be fair, you do have some time before they get there, even though they're ramping. The White Rose is again just another burn card. The Benja is in there as a disruptor. Again, another card that can be bounced back with Fox, with Snake to be reused. And, you may think, and I was of this mindset too. I'm still of this mindset, honestly. How much impact can a Benja really have? Am I really banishing a Popsicle? Is that really good value? Sometimes it is. But again, if you watched how those Sapphire, or you've played those Sapphire decks, they really rely on the Maurice's Workshops now. And that is probably the best target for the Benja. If you shut down the Maurice's Workshop, you significantly slow down their draw. Yes, they still have Hiram. It's just the nature of Sapphire decks. They've always had Hiram since set 2. But the Maurice's Workshop really slows down their ability to cycle through their deck, and it provides good impact in terms of its disruption on curve. Now again, with the way that Sapphire Steel is built, or even Ruby Sapphire, they're playing that Workshop likely for a reduced cost, because Oswald is hitting it for free in the Sapphire variation. You could play Oswald in the Ruby variation too, but in Ruby you can also play Workshop for 1 because of the unconventional tool. So you are again trading out a 3-cost card for what's likely been played for free, and it could have been hard cast Workshop for 3, but if it gets procced off the Oswald, or comes into play off Oswald, they've played it for free. If they play it for 1 because of the unconventional tool, yeah, you're at a tempo loss a little bit. But you'd still develop the character that's a 2-quester, which is still really relevant. And that's why Benja's in this deck, is because he's also pressure in addition to disruption. Benja's always been good. It's just his time to shine is really when these item decks are coming to the forefront of the metagame, which obviously they are now. I apologize for clicking through so many screens, guys. This is just the nature of Dreamborn. I don't know if there's a way for me to fix it, but whenever I click off of a card, it doesn't go back to the deck right now. Next up, you got Pete, and this probably should be at 4. It is impactful, but when you look at Sapphire Ruby and Sapphire Steel, by the time you're able to play Pete, do you really care about slowing down actions? Probably not. Like, Zeus isn't hitting you for anything that's significant really in your Amethyst Steel deck. And into Sapphire Ruby, what actions are you shutting down? Brawl or B prep. Now, don't get me wrong, Pete is an extremely strong card, and in some instances, stopping the Be Prepared is all you needed to do, even if this was the only action that they played. But into other matchups, you do need to worry about the Pete putting in work, and it does put in that work. You know, you don't necessarily play it on curve. I think you play White Rose is the best card to play on curve, or Benja, depending on the game state. But the Pete should always be used strategically, and it's not necessarily a card you want to play on curve unless you know it can actually have value coming down on 3. And then you're capping out your characters on 4 with Goat and with Rabbit. And this is where the deck really takes a fundamental shift away from, let's say, the dock variations, because if you run docks, you don't run rabbits, and if you run rabbits, you don't run docks. And you could argue that, well, instead of playing, well, I mean, I think you still play snake, but you know, I play dock in this space as well as my 2-drop. But again, you're not playing dock on curve to discard your whole hand on turn 2, right? So it doesn't really solve that problem either. The rabbit continues to just show how much value it has, because you put this card on, and again, this is the same reasoning from the last set where I called rabbits, even from the beginning, right? Again, if you guys watch my top 10, I mean, it's date stamped and everything, right? The day I uploaded it to YouTube. And I said, you know, Genie, yeah, it's a good card, but like Rabbit, the staying power of Rabbit, I think is going to outshine Genie. And I think we've seen that. Why is that the case? Because this card, you play it and then you don't care. You play Genie, you care. You play Genie, yes, it replaces itself, but you paid for it to play it, and you're like, I want this Genie to stick. I don't want you to out it. I want to quest with it. Like that's the point. It's a 2-quester. With the Rabbit, you play it, you draw your card. Yes, you paid your 4, and you're like, yeah, go ahead, deal with it. I'll draw another card anyways. Yeah, it sucks you lose your character and you can't cycle it and get endless draws, but it's like, I'm forcing you to interact with my card that replaces itself twice. I'll take that trade. If I can slow you down enough that you have to deal with my card, and I generate card advantage off of it, sure. I have 4 of them in the deck. I'll draw some more. And that's the difference, right? Rabbit is free pressure, and it replaces itself twice. That's why it's so good. Yes, it's uninkable. I mean, Genie's uninkable too, but the value that Rabbit represents, same with Goat, same concept, just with lore. In my opinion, I mean, sometimes it's more powerful, sometimes not, but like generally drawing the card in grind games matters more. But the Goat is obviously super powerful, and that's why we continue to play for that as well. And then for Zeus, because as I mentioned, like you don't necessarily want to have to use Crab to take out the Tamatoa that turned itself sideways. The goal is that you do not want Tamatoa to turn itself sideways. At least you don't want them to quest with it. And for that reason, Zeus is very important. And part of the issue is that you have to sing Zeus with Goat or Merlin or Rabbit. So, you know, hard casting Zeus is something that you might have to do from time to time. But again, because the new Tamatoa comes down on 6 ink, if they're only able to ramp once or twice, like, and this is how oppressive these Sapphire decks continue to be, it's like, if I go first, I can develop the Goat or the Rabbit first to sing the Zeus. But if I go second and they're able to ramp twice, like I probably have to hard cast the Zeus, right? Because I won't have the advantage of developing the character first. That's how much matters. Playing first or second matters in that matchup. So again, while it seems to be a very uphill struggle because of the bell, you can definitely push through that interaction and disrupt your opponent enough. You know, maybe you play more Benjas. I mean, what would you take out? Maybe you go to 3 Cobra, more Benjas if you see Sapphire Steel being the real force in the metagame over Sapphire Ruby. Maybe you can cut down on a strength, because like I said, you know, you're not going to take out a bell with the strength, unfortunately. Like, and do you really want to exert all those resources in order to deal with a card that the opponent played for free? That's not good, like, card economy. It's tough. It's tough. But you still have the plan of, I can keep my hand healthy enough that I can likely keep up with you, at least to a certain extent. You know, they're definitely going to outgrind you in the long game. But I can do enough where I'm replacing cards, gaining lore in the process, and burning you with things like Cobra, White Rose, Honey Marin, maybe Goat, etc., and bouncing those, cycling those, that I can push through your game plan before you get everything set up. It's a tough ask, but that's the best we've got so far. So Amethyst Steel is definitely an option, but there are definitely powerful interactions you have to take into consideration if you're going to play this deck. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully it wasn't too long, but like I said in the beginning, let me know if you would be interested in, like, because I could talk on this and the interactions a lot more, but I don't want to, make an hour-long video here. But maybe it's worth it if some people are interested in like a MetaFi thing or something like that. Anyways, yeah, let's wrap it up there, guys. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.